And finally this week, we talk about the 25th anniversary of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, directed by Ang Lee, starring Michelle Yeoh and Chow Yun-fat. Now, we're obviously looking over a film again, like we did with Seven, and there's so much that could be said about the actual film you could see. Michelle Yeoh is always amazing.
I love her.
Always amazing. Is brilliant in this film. There's a very strong female presence in this film.
Definitely.
Just amazing forefront of action. The choreography is second to none. I think Quentin Tarantino owes a lot to his theft of all these films, his choreography style. But let's have a talk about something a little more interesting, which is the legacy of the film and what is inspired, where these actors and stories have gone, and what we've seen in the Western world, how it's impacted our sort of filmmaking culture on this side of the pond.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the right place to start, because this is sort of the very high-profile wuxia film that broke through into the mainstream, if you like, in Europe and in America. It's a really interesting example, I think, of how Ang Lee was able to, and I think he does this with several of his films, kind of blend genres with a kind of very commercial sensibility. So, you know, I think this is a really interesting kind of landmark film, really, and you can see that also in the way that, as you know, you mentioned in your introduction, this has influenced countless films. I think the one that is most explicit to me are the Matrix sequels, which, you know, have so much sort of wuxia-inspired choreography, and actually a lot of the dramatic and tragic themes it explores as well. And then, of course, you know, Kill Bill, massively, obviously indebted to Ang Lee's work on this film. But I mean, it's so interesting 25 years on. I mean, do we still see that impact? I think Shang-Chi is probably the most recent film where you can see a really clear reference, that obviously sharing, you know, the cast member of Michelle Yeoh.
Yes, I feel like another major example that I bring up, which was another Oscars darling, was Everything Everywhere All at Once,
For sure.
which deals with, again, starring Michelle Yeoh, who seems to be in every franchise everywhere. But again, that's a really interesting film to look at from a Western perspective, because it was distributed by A24 and produced, and there are predominantly English-speaking characters. Of course, it traverses language very beautifully. What a brilliant film.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's sort of bringing that back after sort of, I think, a bit of a slump. I think action took a direction from Crouching Tiger. There's a film I mentioned before we started rolling, which is a film called Hero, which also deals with this amazing, beautiful film. Extreme melodramatic action. Yeah. Not over the top melodramatic. It requires these great poetic movements. It requires, you know, bouncing from surface to surface with the ease of abusing gravity.
Yeah.
It has no effect. You know, it's superhero before superhero really took off. I think you do actually see it a lot. And I think you had an overexposure to this excessive, but used in a very negative way because it wasn't appropriate for it. I remember seeing in Daredevil, the Ben Affleck Daredevil, quite specifically, they took a lot of inspiration from this film, but completely very terrible use of it. Like the character of Elektra, they have a fight on a park bench. It doesn't work for this sort of vibe. And so I think people actually, some of the legacy of this film is people's knee-jerk reaction to it. Yeah. So then we actually get a much different sort of action choreography later. Daredevil as a character and as a franchise is another good example of this phenomenon itself. The Ben Affleck Daredevil film has too much of that. Of course, there are ninja aspects of the character of Daredevil, but it goes too far. It doesn't fit into the world. It doesn't fit a Western audience's standard for what they thought about superhero films. But then you get the Netflix TV series, which uses very brutal, very realistic, close-knit, long-take action, which isn't glamorous, which isn't supported by all these flips and tricks and twists. And is, of course, most notable in the John Wick franchise as well. But I think John Wick is a nicer example because it's trying to blend the two. Yes. It's trying to find a line between it. But I feel like we've lost a trick because there is such, and I say the word balletic, like there's a ballet quality to this. Choreography can be beautiful. Yes. And also effectively devastating. Yeah. There are great moments in this where you're on the knee-jerk reaction. There's a moment where one of the villain characters throws back a sai at someone and it hits them in the face, and I went, "Oh damn!" And I would never do that with films. You know, I know how these things are made, so I'm like, oh, you know, it's just, it was a whip pan and it was already in him, but I was like, oh god, that I felt the reaction of it. And I thought, wow, what effective choreography. I sort of find it's a bit of a shame that we've lost a bit more of that push to the extreme. I think it got so popular that it became parody. I think a lot of Quentin Tarantino stuff borders on the line of parody. A film we've also talked about, Team America World Police, parodies.
It does.
These sort of kung fu fighting nature. I know it's not specifically kung fu, but that's what the Western world adopted it as. I think we need to get back to this level of beauty with it. But I think Everything Everywhere All at Once was a good stepping stone to be more interesting in your choreography.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the superhero comparison is also very interesting because obviously Ang Lee then goes on and makes the very maligned Hulk film. I mean, the action in that is very different. But, you have a similar kind of sense of spectacle created by, everyone just being on wires all the time and being flung across the screen. And, that there is I would say, a kind of comic book indulgence in the action in that film that comes, I think, from a familiarity with wuxia style action. And I also think, actually tonally, the myth of wuxia stories, right, which are very much a kind of genre and tend to center on people who are, they're a little bit like, Robin Hood or William Tell that we were discussing a couple of weeks ago. They tend to be these stories about ordinary people, not kings or princes or whatever, or ordinary people who sort of go on this extraordinary journey and fight for what's good and right. And that's every single superhero story ever. So there is a kind of interesting shared DNA. And I'm sort of shocked that we haven't seen more superhero movies from Ang Lee, therefore. It feels like, it was sort of in his bones, in his veins. He did Hulk, and I mean,
people
I don't
so
remember
turned off.
exactly.
They ran away, I think, from
I
Ang Lee.
don't remember that film coming out because I was far too young. But I think there's kind of a little bit of a reappreciation for it happening. I think, in the sort of the post MCU era that we're now in, people are sort of reevaluating that film. I wonder if we could see like a really crazy wuxia style superhero movie from him at some point, because I'd be really up for that.
I feel like that is a trick that, again, like I say, a lot of the missed opportunity of the legacy of this film is that superhero films have become a bland, repeated product.
Yes.
And the action of many films with their major action scenes becomes a flurry of special effects. And it disappears into the pixelated world of underpaid, poor visual effects artists.
Yes.
And so I do think, as I said before, it would be interesting to see a creator like Ang Lee, again, attempting something in this post-MCU world where we have had too much of one thing, and now it's time to sort of try something else. Because Ang Lee's films are all incredibly different. He has done such a vast approach. But I think the legacy of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon that isn't seen, I specifically have talked a lot about choreography, but obviously Ang Lee goes on to direct Brokeback Mountain.
Absolutely.
And Life of Pi.
Yeah. And
then you have to look at the moments in this film, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, that deal with a repressed love and and legacy and expectation.
Yes.
A lot of these examples that crop up in his films, quite a lot of just people, the human need, the human want to be something different or have something different, but you can't quite break through it. Central two main characters are a repressed love for one another. And you see these things sing, and that's why Brokeback Mountain is so effective.
Yeah.
Because you have the maturity of that director who can do the best action you've ever seen.
Absolutely.
But can also take that moment to look at those very nuanced and have great direction. Because to be honest, the characters in this are not filled with backstory. They're not filled with, you might even say they're not that deep characters because they have very standard roles that you might see in 100 martial arts films. However, when those moments come, you can see in the performances of the actors and just how they take it, that the direction was so precise.
Yes.
They knew exactly what they wanted. And I think that's a trait that follows through in his movies. And again, what maybe we're missing in these action epics is just actually having the nuance of both.
Yeah.
Choreography can be beautiful, and you can partner that with beautiful emotion.
No, I think that's so right. And interestingly, when you look at something like Everything Ever All at Once, I think that does a really perfect, combining of emotion, of action. And, that's a film which sort of has free license because of the kind of multiverse concept of it, to indulge in stuff that is not realistic, shall we say, And I think that we sort of exist in an age where, and, I suppose the zenith of this is something like the Batman, which is so gritty and so realistic. I think we live in an age where we're very scared of things that are a little bit divorced from reality. If we look at something like, we were talking about Robin Hood in relation to William Tell last week, and the Taron Egerton Robin Hood film, which is very gritty and is a kind of, as far away from a sort of, not necessarily swords and tights.
Bows and feathers, sort of like tights.
We're terrified
men in
of
films.
Yeah, we're terrified of stuff that is not really gritty at the moment. I think there's a perception that people won't take it seriously or it won't sell. But I'd love to go back to a slightly more kind of poetic, just slightly more whimsical form of storytelling, especially when it comes to those action genres, because it's ballet at the end of the day. When you watch Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, it's dance. The combat is beautiful, and it ties in so fantastically with the characters and their journey. And you could almost watch it on silent because the action does the telling of the story for you.
Absolutely. And I think you make an excellent point that, and I think I can agree with you with Ang Lee's Hulk and just sort of the approach to action films, because that's all superhero movies are, with this mythos.
Yeah.
Because this is like a fairy tale, like a story, like someone telling a story. And again, the film I mentioned before, Hero, is the same thing. It's like a story passed on, and you really get that sense of it. And we've lost that in our big mythos films. I think they are too concerned with being gritty. And I think, the great example is that the James Gunn sort of Suicide Squad, the James Gunn Guardians of the Galaxy films, which don't take themselves as seriously, do much better.
Fantastic.
And then that's why I'm very much looking forward to his Superman, because I'm like, finally, you've put some color back into Superman. Because this is just like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, someone on wires pretending to fly.
Yeah.
But you can do it in such an interesting way. And I think the legacy of it is a bit skewed. And I think people need to rewatch these films and understand really what made them work is just maturity with these things, but also a bit of fun. I think these characters, the way the movement is, as you said, it flows like water. It's not brutal. It's beautiful. And I think let's see more action films like that. Let's see how we can do that in this new landscape of post-MCU, post-John Wick.